first light does not arrive with a sudden rush, but rather as a slow, hesitant bleed of gray across the eastern sky. You feel it before you see it, a subtle shift in the air's temperature, lifting the heavy, damp blanket of the night. Waking before the great clamor of Rome even stirs is always a quiet act of discipline for you. Your bare feet meet the worn stones near your dwelling, cool and slightly gritty beneath the soles. The scent that greets you immediately is not of perfume or spice, but a deep, earthy mix: wet stone, banked wood smoke, and the underlying musk of sleeping humanity. You dress quietly, the movement habitual, efficient. There is no need for haste, only for precision in the start of the day's rhythm. Your first thought always turns to the source material. Today, the clay awaits your attention. You leave the close shelter of the neighborhood and begin the walk toward the outskirts of the settlement, where the specialized pits have been dug into the low ground. It is a dedicated path, rarely trod by anyone who is not in pursuit of raw earth. The air here carries a different scent than near the clustered houses. It is the sharp, clean smell of minerals and damp vegetation. As you approach the pit area, the ground underfoot changes. It softens considerably, giving slightly beneath your weight. You move slowly, acutely aware of the cool, yielding give of the soil beneath your sandals. The pits are carved into a shallow depression, catching the nascent light in patches of wet sheen. You pause at the edge, looking down into the exposed earth. This is where the lifeblood of your trade rests: the clay itself. It is not a uniform color. Instead, it presents a rich, mottled tapestry of tones that tell you much about its origin and future use. Here, there are patches stained a deep, reddish ochre, suggesting high iron content, perfect for vessels meant to hold colored liquids. Nearby, the earth holds a paler, more grayish hue, perhaps suitable for fine tableware or drinking cups. You kneel down, not out of necessity, but out of sheer observational respect for the material. Your fingers dip into the surface layer, testing the texture. The first sample you gather feels cool and pleasantly dense. It is damp enough to hold its shape in your palm without dripping excessively. Yet it also shows just enough internal structure that it will not crumble when handled. This particular batch seems promising. It possesses a balance of plasticity and strength, properties crucial for the initial stages of forming. You carefully work in small sections, peeling off handfuls of earth that are already saturated, allowing the cool moisture to dampen your skin. You consider how different layers behave. Some pieces are sticky, binding together almost unnaturally, while others seem drier at their core. This process is not merely gathering. It is a preliminary analysis, a silent reading of the land's gifts. The effort requires you to remain perfectly still for long stretches, observing subtle variations in color, a streak of greenish blue perhaps, or a wash of muted purple where mineral deposits have leaked into the soil. The quiet sounds of the site begin to register. the occasional distant clanging sound from the city core, muffled by distance, the soft rustle of reeds growing near the periphery of the pit, and most intimately, the gentle squelch of your own boots in the moist substrate. You scoop up several large baskets, traditionally woven reeds reinforced with sinew, that will carry your findings back to the main yard. The clay you place inside is never mixed yet. Each batch remains distinct, labeled by location or anticipated use. This separation ensures quality control, a necessary patience before any real art can begin. As you lift the heavy baskets, the damp earth weighing considerably more than dry dust, you feel the weight distribute through your arms and shoulders, a familiar ache that is also deeply reassuring. It speaks to capability. You turn away from the pits, leaving the raw material undisturbed beneath the growing warmth of the morning sun. The journey back is slower, marked by pockets of observation. You notice how the light is changing on the pottery shards scattered along the path, the way it catches a minute chip, transforming a piece of refuse into something geometrically elegant. You pass a small group of laborers, already beginning their work further down the street. They are sorting kindling wood, stacking bundles with practiced economy of movement. Their rhythm is established, an industrial counterpoint to your quiet journey. When you finally reach the main pottery yard, the atmosphere shifts immediately. The coolness of the morning air gives way to the trapped warmth between the clustered sheds and workshops. The large storage vats of water already bubble faintly near a brazier, kept at temperature for mixing. Here, the smell becomes more complex. The foundational scent of wet earth merges with the acrid bite of wood smoke that has been banked overnight, tempered by the sweeter, almost metallic odor of minerals prepared for glazes. This is the heart of your domain. You set down the heavy baskets containing the fresh clay and begin the initial process of assessment within the yard. You carefully spread out several samples on a flat surface covered with straw. Your goal now is to transform this raw material into usable slip, a highly watered, fine paste ready for shaping. This involves mixing the freshly dug ochre-stained earth with other types of local clay found in deeper seams, ensuring a balance that will allow the vessel to be both strong and flexible. You use your hands, scraping and pressing, until the mixture achieves the correct consistency, fluid enough to accept a mold or slurry glaze, yet thick enough not to weep away entirely. The rhythm settles into a deep focus now. The movement of dipping, stirring, patting, repeating. This methodical preparation is less about creation and more about enabling it, about making the inert earth pliable for human will. You observe how sunlight penetrates dust motes suspended in the air, turning the workshop into a softly illuminated space. The sound becomes primarily confined to your own labor. The soft thunk of mud against stone, the gentle scraping of your mixing paddles. It is meditative work, allowing stray thoughts about tomorrow's markets or last season's dry spell to simply drift away with the mixture. The realization settles in that this quiet morning ritual, the collection, the analysis, the preparation, is infinitely more complex than the act of throwing a pot on the wheel later. It is an intimate conversation with geology, a required deference to natural timing and available resources. The perfect vessel begins not when it touches the spinning wheel, but here, in the humid peace of the early day, amidst the earthy tones of your carefully prepared slip. You stand at the edge of your workspace, the air still cool from the early morning dampness that settled deep into the terracotta ground. The raw clay from the pits has been brought back here, waiting in massive, shallow troughs. It smells distinctly of minerals and wet dust, a scent unique to the earth itself. Taking a moment, you survey the material, noticing how the ochre streaks blend with patches of cooler gray, evidence of varying local seams. This careful inspection is not merely about quality. It is about understanding predictability, knowing which batch will cooperate best when coaxed into shape. You feel the slight grit under your worn sandals as you turn slowly around the perimeter of the yard. The first step always involves turning the clay from its natural, haphazard state into something ordered and manageable. You gather a sizable lump. It feels cool, heavy, and oddly yielding in your hands. It is dense earth, not soft mud, possessing a resilient wetness that promises to hold a careful shape. You move toward the designated area where the great pottery wheel rests, its wooden basin perpetually damp from use. Kneading the clay is an act of both physical effort and quiet meditation. You begin by tearing off smaller segments of the lump, placing them close together on the prepared ground beside the wheel. The work starts slow, deliberately. Your hands work in rhythmic patterns, folding the material over itself, pressing down with firm palms, then allowing your thumbs to dig deep into the heart of the mass. With each fold, you are not just reforming the earth, you are equalizing its structure, removing trapped air pockets and inconsistencies that would cause a future pot to wobble or collapse. The feel of the clay against your skin is paramount. It transfers the damp coolness of the early morning into your palms, settling deeply into the lines and calluses there. You notice how the texture changes. Initially rough and varied, it gradually becomes smooth, almost slick, under the persistent pressure of your effort. This wedging process demands patience. A moment of too much force, and the clay will fracture. A moment of insufficient care, and the material remains weak. As you continue to work, focusing entirely on the immediate feel beneath your hands, the rhythm begins to assert itself. It is a deep breathing pattern that syncs with the cyclical motion of pressing and smoothing. You are teaching the chaos of raw earth the virtue of uniformity. The scent intensifies, a mix of wet loam, mild iron tang, and the faint, sweet mustiness of clay minerals worked over time. This scent tells you more about this specific day's yield than any foreman's shout could. The large lump shrinks down from an unruly mass into a cohesive, satisfyingly dense body. You now begin to guide it toward the wheel basin. Positioning is key. The weight must be distributed evenly so that the rotational force can take hold without pulling the material apart or causing excessive vibration in your arms. You use careful pressure to coax the lump onto the center of the wet wheel, ensuring it settles directly into the central mounting point. The process of centering requires a unique physical understanding and deep focus. You must meet the resistance of the earth with balanced force. You press down and out simultaneously, using both palms and thumbs in concert, generating gentle outward pressure while maintaining vertical alignment. It is not enough simply to push. You must guide the material into perfect equilibrium relative to the spinning axis. You feel the sudden change when the mass finally settles. The erratic wobble ceases, replaced by a steady, grounded potential energy. The clay now sits centered and taut on the wheelhead, resembling nothing so much as a perfectly still puddle of dense shadow. This small victory in physical control feels profound, marking the true beginning of any useful form. You pause your hands an inch above the spinning material. You take a deep breath, drawing in the earthy coolness of the yard, then slowly exhale it. The initial difficulty is over. The raw material has yielded to careful discipline. It has been prepared for direction. Looking closely at the centered lump, you can appreciate the hidden physics at play, the potential energy held within that wet mass, awaiting your shaping hand. It feels ready now, receptive and stable, a canvas of damp earth waiting for the architecture of utility. The rhythm established by centering is crucial. It teaches control before creation. You find a deep satisfaction in this fundamental step, recognizing that every complex curve or graceful sweep to come depends entirely on achieving this foundational stasis. The day's work has been channeled down to its simplest physical truth. The perfect center. You carry the freshly wedged mound of clay, its surface still cool and smelling faintly of damp river silt. The weight is surprisingly manageable, yet it possesses a profound density that speaks only of earth and time. You find your preferred spot at the wheel, positioning the solid mass directly over the rotating basin. The air here, within the confines of the workshop yard, holds a complex scent. Wet clay mixed with cured wood smoke, faint traces of vinegar from last night's washing, and the sharp, metallic tang of minerals exposed to the sun. You breathe deeply, absorbing these scents. They are the smells of sustained labor, of permanence carved out of transience. The wheel itself is solid, its heavy wooden base worn smooth by countless revolutions. Its circular motion whispers a steady, gentle song against the backdrop of the yard's occasional muffled sounds. The clink of pottery stacked nearby, the distant braying of an animal, the low murmur of voices discussing commodities in Latin. You observe these background noises not as distractions, but as a steady counterpoint to your own concentrated labor, providing the necessary rhythm for deep focus. You begin the process of centering. This is not merely a physical action. It is a conversation between your body and the material. You place your hands upon the damp clay. The texture is cool at first, almost greasy in its saturation, responding slowly to the warmth emanating from your palms. With controlled force, you push the edges inward, using steady pressure against the resistance of the wet earth. You feel the moment when the chaotic lump settles into a unified center, no longer fighting gravity or itself. This initial stability is critical. It assures that every subsequent movement will be precise and directed. As the wheel turns beneath your hands, you focus entirely on the point where your fingers meet the clay. You anticipate the pullback, the minor wobble, the slight shifting of weight that indicates uneven saturation or an improperly wedged section. Your mind empties itself of peripheral thought, becoming hyper-focused solely on the resistance feedback transmitted through the wet medium. The repetitive motion becomes a sort of physical meditation. Each rotation brings you marginally closer to a state of deep calm. Once centered, you begin the ascent into form. You cup your hands around the mass, establishing the foundational plane of the vessel. Today's task is an amphora, one of those gracefully proportioned containers designed for trade, for storing and transporting wine or olive oil across vast distances. The sheer size of it demands a slow, respectful approach. You work outwards from the center line, gradually expanding the body of the vase. You feel the clay yielding under your palms, transitioning from a resistant mass to a cooperative partner. There is an inherent knowledge here, passed down through generations in this very yard, knowing exactly how much water the material holds and at what pressure it will hold its structure against time and travel. The process requires you to maintain an even, steady wrist action, guiding the expanding walls upwards. You are not merely shaping clay. You are translating a need, the necessity for storage, the desire for trade, into solid form. You visualize the final product, knowing that this damp earth will eventually bear the weight of expensive oil and wine, connecting far-flung towns and markets. Slowly, deliberately, you coax the shoulders upwards, beginning to define the characteristic neck of the amphora. As you pull the walls higher, they change from a pliable, yielding substance into something that possesses architectural dignity. The curve must be perfect, too narrow at any point, and it risks cracking under thermal stress too wide, and its capacity is lost. You pause sometimes, lifting your hands away to simply observe the vessel rotating beneath you. You look at the newly formed curves, tracing them with an imaginary finger. It is startling how beautiful pure utility can be. The amphora is designed for one single purpose, to hold liquids, yet in its balanced geometry, it holds a certain inherent grace that surpasses mere function. Consider the implications of this object. When you finish this vase, it will travel from your yard, through river barges and rough roads, to some distant villa wallowing in the luxury of imported Falernian wine. It will endure more movement and handling than you can imagine. Your touch imbues it not just with shape, but with potential life. After defining the main body and establishing the neck, you must gently cup out the base. This requires finesse. Lifting too sharply or pushing unevenly could cause a structural failure. You work slowly, refining the curve where the base meets the body. The clay feels suddenly lighter in your hands as the necessary material is removed, yet its integrity remains perfectly maintained. The amphora now sits on the wheel, completed for this stage of drying. It stands tall and elegant, an empty monument to potential commerce. You lift it carefully with both hands, feeling the smooth weight of the damp clay against your thumbs. There is a quiet satisfaction in the object's symmetry. You notice small details around you as you set the piece down on a stack waiting for the initial drying racks. The sunlight, filtering through the eaves of the workshop, catches tiny particles of mineral dust suspended in the humid air. They drift and sparkle like microscopic gold flakes, the detritus of profound transformation. Each flake is a remnant of earth worked into art. You wipe your hands methodically on a scrap of rough linen, then breathe again, allowing the scent of wet clay to settle deeply within your lungs. This repetitive action settles your mind, reaffirming the rhythm that governs existence here. Gather, center, shape, weight, and fire. The cycle is eternal, a slow, persistent hum underpinning the vibrant chaos of Roman life outside these walls. There are others working nearby. You hear the rhythmic sh hic thump of a wheel operating on basic dinner bowls, smaller vessels that will fulfill the daily needs of families in modest housing. You observe their methodical pace. There is no competition in the yard. There is only shared labor under the slow authority of natural cycles: the sun, the water, and the heat. You feel the beginnings of a deep ache in your forearm muscles, an honest discomfort that comes from hours of focused, physical engagement. This soreness is not viewed as merely pain, but as proof of existence. It means you have engaged with the material fully, using your body to participate in the flow of history and commerce. The yard quiets further as the day progresses. You look at the amphora, now drying on its rack, catching the light differently than when it was wet. The subtle tones of ochre and buff appear under this dry illumination, the colors of permanence. This perfect form will wait through the day's remaining hours, awaiting the gradual, necessary hardening that prepares it for the great transformative moment, the kiln's heat. The quiet patience required here is perhaps more difficult than the physical effort. It is knowing that your skill has done its part, and now all you can do is monitor, waiting for the final, intense command of fire to complete the cycle. You carry the small stone mortar and pestle over to a low table dusted with pale colored powder. The workspace, usually slick with damp earth residue from the wheel, feels different now, drier, chalkier. This dryness announces a change of focus, a subtle shift away from the wet structure of clay toward the dry geometry of minerals. You settle onto the rough wooden stool, and the rhythmic clicking sound that follows your movements is the primary beat of the chapter. It is a slow, measured counterpoint to the damp slosh and smooth glide that defined the previous hours at the wheel. The powdered substances before you are the concentrated essence of local earth. They do not come from the deep pits where the clay was gathered. These powders speak of other places, of ancient sources, of burned bone, or oxidized metals taken from riverbeds far upstream. Each small pile holds a unique potential color. The pale yellow suggesting ochre oxides, the dusty reddish stain hinting at iron content, and some piles a stark, almost unnatural green, which you know comes from weathered copper deposits. You begin by selecting your materials for today's glaze batch. The air here is thick with an utterly distinct, dry scent, a composite smell of burnt sweetness mixed with mineral dust. It smells academic, like forgotten recipes. It speaks purely of chemistry and time. You lift the pestle, feeling its familiar weight balanced in your hand. This tool feels less like equipment and more like a continuation of your own arm, an extension designed for this specific alchemy. The first task is grinding. You begin to place small amounts of raw pigment into the mortar. They feel oddly gritty, unlike the soft, yielding give of the clay. As you start the circular motion with the pestle, generating friction and releasing powder, you are doing more than just mixing. You are awakening latent chemical potential. The grinding is tiring in a specific way, a vibration that travels up your wrist bone and settles into a deep ache in your forearm. You notice how the dust cloud rises briefly when you exert pressure, catching the weak afternoon sunlight filtering through the open doorway. For a moment, everything around you seems suspended by that floating haze of crushed minerals. It is fragile, these colors. They only exist as powder until transformed and bound. If mixed improperly, they will fall short. If fired too hot or too cold, their promise might vanish entirely. Once the pigment is reduced to a fine consistency, it needs binding. This is where the water comes in, but not merely rainwater. You reach for the strained slurry, the watery waste from your clay preparation earlier. You mix small amounts of this liquid with the ground earth colors, and the process becomes one of gradual transformation. The dry powders absorb the moisture reluctantly at first, resisting the wetness as if it were too rich a gift. Slowly, hesitantly, they yield, transforming into thick, almost buttery suspensions. You spend long moments observing the mixtures in the ceramic basins. You tilt the basins slightly, watching how light catches the nascent color, the muted moss green that hints at copper reacting with iron, or the deep, opaque blue derived perhaps from a specialized mixture of silica and cobalt, though you rarely use such costly pigments. The smell changes as the liquids combine. The sharp, mineral tang of the dry dust softens into a deeper, more grounded aroma, a scent entirely unique to wet earth mixed with inorganic salts. It is the scent of transformation, the promise of permanence captured within temporary liquid suspension. You gently test the consistency with a finger dipped in the glaze slurry. It needs to flow just correctly, thick enough that it does not simply drip away into nothingness, yet fluid enough to cover every curve and valley of the pottery surface evenly. You are seeking an ideal viscosity, a perfect balance between adherence and runoff. This mixing process demands a kind of focused stillness. Your mind retreats from counting sales or worrying about the upcoming harvest. All that exists is the mortar, the pestle, the pigmented slurry, and the geometry of light interacting with the chemical compounds. It is meditative work, deeply physical, but entirely mental as well. You remember the necessity of these glazes. They are not merely decoration, they are functional shields. They seal the porous surface of the fired clay, making a vessel waterproof for olive oil, resilient enough to hold wine, or sturdy enough to catch the morning dew. The glaze transforms simple earthenware into something lasting and useful. After preparing several batches, the yellowish glaze meant for water storage jars, the deeper red for serving bowls, and a near-white glaze that highlights the clay beneath, you take your cleaned brushes. These are not the heavy tools of shaping. They are fine-tipped instruments designed to deposit light washes over curved surfaces. You start on a few simple test pieces, small plates and cups left aside from the main production line. You dip the brush into the pale ochre slurry. The glaze is cool against your skin, smelling intensely mineral. Carefully, you begin to paint. You do not apply it quickly. Instead, you work slowly, following the established contours of the piece, the gentle curve of the cup's rim, the vertical slope of the small plate. Each stroke requires visual anticipation, knowing exactly how that semi-liquid pigment will settle and flow across the dry surface. The act becomes a delicate dance between control and surrender. You are guiding the glaze, but eventually it must follow its own physical laws, gravity pulling it downward, capillary action drawing it into minute pours. You observe where it pools slightly in the concave areas, knowing that slight buildup might lead to runoff marks later. You set aside the glazed test pieces to dry in a sheltered corner of the yard. They hold the glaze like thinly painted skins, waiting for the final heat. The raw materials, the earth pigments, and the processed clay have now combined with water, achieving a delicate state of suspended potential. They are ready for the tremendous event that lies ahead. The focus shifts slightly as you look around the yard again. You notice the organized chaos, the stacks of greenware waiting patiently, some bearing their soft, matte finish, others holding the faint sheen of your freshly applied glaze. Everything is awaiting the collective energy stored in the massive woodpile nearby and the readiness of the kiln. Lifting another small basin of vibrant pigment, perhaps a speckled brown derived from specific local shale, you take one last few moments to simply smell it. It is the scent of labor, finalized, the dry tang of effort, mixed with the damp lifeblood of creation. This process, the careful marriage of mineral and water onto already shaped forms, is how utility achieves beauty. You wipe your hands on a rag stained yellow from ochre dust and look toward the looming profile of the kiln, feeling the slow rhythm of preparation settling into a purposeful, anticipatory silence. The light in the workshop has softened now, moving from the sharp clarity of the midday sun to a deeper, more forgiving amber. The work that was meant to be finished hours ago remains before you, several vessels waiting for their final judgment. They are not whole, nor are they entirely discarded. Scattered among the neatly stacked amphorae and the row of newly glazed bowls are pieces requiring attention. You notice them because utility is everything here, and every object carries a record of its intended life. You lean down slowly, your movements practiced and deliberate. Your fingers drift over the surface of a small pitcher. It has an elegant curve to its neck, clearly built for oil or perhaps fragrant water. Near the base, running almost invisibly into the terracotta floor, is a faint line, a hairline fracture. At first glance, it might be dismissed as just dust accumulation, a random imperfection in the fired glaze. You run your fingertip lightly over the path of that crack. It feels cool and unnervingly smooth, a taut scar on otherwise solid ceramic. This piece was clearly used. The nature of this feint wear suggests that it has borne weight, perhaps tipped, or scraped against another surface during transport. You recall the countless hours spent coaxing its perfect shape from the pliable earth, an act of controlled creation. Now, time and use have introduced a vulnerability. You step back slightly, observing the crack in better light. It is shallow, certainly not catastrophic, but it compromises the integrity, the promise of holding liquid contents. You pause, letting the quiet weight of the object settle around you. This subtle fracture makes you consider the entire lifespan of crafted goods, not just their making. Every surface here tells a story. There are pieces with small chips on the rim, like a discarded serving bowl where someone might have accidentally struck it against a hard edge while setting a table. These chips are minor cosmetic failures, but they speak to the physical rhythm of the household, the scraping chairs, the bustle of meal preparation, the crowded economy of daily life. You pick up another vessel, this one shaped like a canteen, designed for travel or long journeys. Near the joining point where the handle meets the body, there is dull abrasion, not a true crack, but a constant rubbing away by friction. This speaks to its purpose, being gripped many times, carried over rough ground, subjected to repeated stresses of movement. The process of observing these small failures becomes a meditative act in itself. You are assessing structural needs against historical wear patterns. It requires an eye trained not just on beauty, but solely on robust functionality. An object's worth is measured by how much labor it can withstand and still perform its intended function with reliability. You reach for your tools, a fine abrasive stone, a pot of specialized slurry used for minor repairs, and a soft brush meant only for dusting. You approach the cracked pitcher again. The nature of this repair is not merely filling the void. It is structurally reinforcing the material back to a state of near original strength. This involves meticulous patience, a careful application of binding materials, and gentle manipulation of the glaze. You work slowly, allowing the slurry to wick into the hairline fissure. You feel the subtle give of the earth paste under your fingertip, the creamy, damp coolness contrasting with the hard resilience of the fired glaze. It is an act that seems almost reverent, dedicating effort not to a masterpiece, but to a tool, a simple receptacle designed for repeatable use. There is a unique satisfaction in this kind of repair. You are not creating something new, you are preserving utility. The object gains time, its lifespan extended by your skill and careful material knowledge. This speaks to the deeper economy of Roman life, an economy where waste was costly and resource management dictated existence. Nothing, not wood, nor metal, nor earth, was simply discarded. Your attention shifts across the drying racks. There are several bowls deeply stained with a reddish hue, perhaps from being used frequently for food preparations involving strong spices or mineral-rich soils. The discoloration is not merely dirt. It has seeped into the porous surface of the clay and absorbed history. You observe how this staining itself becomes part of its identity, a visible record of meals shared, of trade goods prepared, and of domestic life unfolding over weeks and months. It makes you think about the concept of perfection. In fine art, perfection might mean flawless execution. Here, in functional pottery, a certain degree of usewear becomes part of its character. The patina, the subtle imperfections, these are not flaws to be eradicated, but earned marks of service. They testify that the object has lived up to its design. You notice small differences among bowls crafted for different uses. Some have slightly thickened bases designed to sit stably on rough tavern tables. Others possess a narrower mouth, suggesting they were intended for pouring specific liquids with delicate control. Each structural nuance is dictated by its social environment: the noisy taberna shop, the quiet courtyard kitchen, the grand banquet hall. The cumulative effect of these observations slows your breath and quiets your mind. You are not merely repairing ceramics, you are interpreting the daily rhythms of a community. You are documenting how people lived, ate, traded, and stored their essentials. This silent dialogue between object and environment is profound. Your movements continue in this measured rhythm, a small action followed by slow observation, moving from one piece to the next. You might gently buff a chipped rim with a smooth stone until the edges are softened, minimizing the sharp point that could otherwise cause an accident. This physical gesture mirrors the way life itself softens edges over time. Accidents round out hard corners. You look at your hands, stained lightly with reddish ochres and mineral dust. These hands have moved thousands of times today, kneading clay, shaping walls, dipping glazes, applying slurry. They are marked by contact with utility, a testament to physical engagement that is grounded and constant. The sense of ownership here is different from modern concepts of possession. You do not own the use of these vessels. You facilitate their continuation into service. The satisfaction comes from knowing that your skill contributes to the unbroken chain of daily life, that when someone needs an amphora tomorrow, it will still stand firm, carrying its cargo safely through the passage of time. The faint scent in the yard is a complex blend. Wet earth mixed with dry mineral dust, wood smoke clinging lightly to the glaze residue, and the sharp, sweet tang of damp clay. These are the permanent perfumes of survival and skilled craft. As evening deepens and the labor continues slowly toward the drying racks, you sense the enduring weight of this history in the very air, the subtle reminder that even the most ephemeral daily rituals require an immense amount of methodical care to sustain them. The careful process of drying is not a single action, but a quiet passage through time. You watch the freshly glazed forms arranged in neat piles across the yard and recognize that their state now is one of suspended animation. They are fragile, holding the geometry of an amphora or the gentle curve of a basin. Yet they do not yet possess life's resilience, nor have they achieved the profound permanence of the kiln's heat. You understand this delicate moment better than anyone. These pots are in a waiting state, existing between the cool dampness of the water and the fiery embrace that awaits them. You begin by collecting your drying racks. These are not grand structures, but simple arrangements of rough-hewn olive wood or squared pieces of durable timber. Each rack must be spaced perfectly from its neighbor, allowing a consistent flow of air to circulate around every surface. You run your hand over the aged wood. It holds the faint scent of sun-baked dry rot and stored labor. This spacing is critical, for if any two forms touch too closely, or if an air current struggles to move between them, one section will dry unevenly. The risk is warping, cracking, or developing soft spots that will fail when the massive forces of heat are applied. You spend time inspecting each piece as you carry it toward a designated staging area. You observe the greenware. Its surface still carries faint streaks of earth and slurry, reflecting the work done in the morning light. Sometimes, a glaze pool looks glossy under the sun's angle, catching the light with an almost watery sheen. These slight variations are records of the craft, the precise moment your finger dipped into the pigment mix, or where the water beaded on the curved belly. You notice how the dampness differs across different parts of a vessel, thicker at the base, perhaps slightly uneven around the rim. The structure of this storage area is inherently geometric. The pots are stacked in pyramidal formations, like carefully balanced mounds awaiting ascension. You arrange them with careful geometry. The largest pieces form the bases, supporting smaller bowls nested on top. This stacking requires a subtle understanding of weight distribution and structural stability. Every pot must feel secure, capable of enduring not only gravity, but also the intense vibrations that will accompany their journey into the communal heat. It is an exercise in patience translated into architecture. As you work through these stacks, your movements become slower, more deliberate. The initial urgency of creation has yielded to a measured rhythm. You find yourself looking up, noticing how the midday sun casts sharp, repeating shadows across the pale earthen floor. These shadow lines, they are temporary, moving records of light and architecture, and they seem to underscore the impermanence of this current state. Everything here is subject to change. Nothing truly remains static. You think about the raw clay you gathered days ago, which started as a simple, unassuming pile of ochre dust. It has passed through so many transformations: wet slip, centered mound, cupped vessel, glazed form, and now dried greenware awaiting fire. Each stage is a lesson in controlled process. The pottery cycle mirrors life itself: potential gathering, intense labor, careful nurturing, and finally, a profound change that defines the final state. The scent of the yard shifts throughout these hours. In the morning, it was sharp, the mineral tang of wet clay mixed with damp dust. As the day warms, the smell mellows. You begin to notice the dry undertones of straw used for fuel, mingling faintly with the distinct, slightly metallic aroma of sun-baked earth and silica glaze. It is a scent of anticipation, mixing nature's elements with human industry. You carry smaller items, dishes, or cups too delicate to join the major stacks, and place them on individual shelves that are elevated slightly off the ground. You examine their forms closely. A small drinking cup, for instance, shows how the thickness of its lip has been handled, a slight pinch added by hand after it was fully formed. This minor deviation from perfect geometry speaks volumes about the human touch, the skilled intervention that elevates a simple function into an object imbued with history and care. You trace these lines with your fingertip, feeling the coolness of the fired-on clay, even though it is unfired. Around you, the day's activity provides a soft, constant counterpoint to your focused labor. a worker might pass by, hauling baskets filled not with raw earth, but with dry kindling, small bundles of olive branches, or scrub wood intended for the kiln later. The crunch of wood underfoot contrasts with the muted thud of pots being set into place. A vendor selling pottery may sit nearby, running a cloth over already finished wares, demonstrating their durable sheen, a visible reminder of the profound change that awaits these specific pieces. You find yourself contemplating the simple concept of utility. Every single object you stack, the sturdy amphora meant to carry wine across provinces, the shallow bowl designed for daily wash, the small lamp base, is predicated on function. They are instruments for sustained life. They hold water, they transport goods, they provide light, or they elevate a meal. Their value is not aesthetic luxury, it is dependable service. This steady, predictable requirement is the quiet engine that keeps the community fed and functioning. The systematic arrangement of these stacks becomes almost meditative. You are organizing not just pots, but time itself. Time must be allowed to pass at the exact rate of drying for their survival. If they dry too fast, the exterior will set before the interior has finished adjusting. If they remain wet for too long in a single pocket, mold may take root and compromise the entire piece. The stacks become miniature models of optimal equilibrium. You pause, wiping dust from your brow with the back of a wrist calloused by water and earth. You look out across the yard at the collection of geometric forms awaiting transformation. They are beautiful in their sheer organization, a careful assembly of earthy materials built solely for endurance. The stacks stand like silent promises, waiting for the communal heat to seal their destiny. This quiet moment of stacking is itself an essential part of the craft. It is the necessary silence before the roar, the methodical stillness that precedes the great consuming fire. The afternoon sun begins its slow, warm decline, casting long shadows that stretch across the packed earth floor of the pottery yard. You feel the familiar ache in your lower back and shoulders, a deep, settled soreness that is simply part of the day's rhythm. Today, however, the focus shifts entirely from wet hands to controlled, enveloping heat. The communal kiln stands at the far end of the yard, a massive structure built of sturdy brick, its surface warm to the touch, even hours before any fire is lit. You approach it slowly, observing its scale. It is not just an oven, it is a contained environment where earth becomes permanence. Before you begin loading the vessels, there is the careful choreography of preparation. Small groups gather around the kiln's mouth, workers who know this process by instinct. You observe how they handle the wood, specific lengths of oak or ash, kindling that catches readily and burns cleanly without excessive smoke. The scent here is different from the sweet dampness of the clay pit. It carries the dry, vegetal tang of seasoned timber and deep, banked embers. Your task begins with the pots themselves. You take the racks of drying greenware, the unfired amphorae, the sturdy little bowls, the vessels destined for olive oil or wine, and begin the careful process of assessing their readiness. You run your fingers along the curve of a large storage jar, noting if the surface is uniform and dry enough to withstand the sudden stress of intense heat. If any piece still retains too much moisture, it could crack violently within the kiln's embrace. The thought of such breakage brings a quiet alertness. These objects must survive this transition perfectly, for their very survival represents the sustenance of daily life. In the city outside, you and your colleagues work together to load the interior chambers. This is not merely stacking. It is an engineering exercise in managing heat transfer and airflow. You guide the pots onto raised wooden supports or carefully arranged straw mats within the kiln's various compartments. The arrangement must allow hot gases to circulate uniformly, ensuring that every piece, from the plumpest bowl to the tallest amphora, receives equal care. Too dense a packing, and some vessels will simply suffocate under the weight of their neighbors. Too much space, and others might cool unevenly, leading to structural weakness upon cooling. The accumulated weight of these carefully stacked forms is palpable, a silent testament to the community's needs. Each curve, each painted glaze, represents a completed cycle, from raw earth through your hands, and now into this fiery heart. You pause for a moment, standing in the cool shade at the kiln's edge, taking a deep breath that catches the mingled scents of wet mineral clay, dry wood smoke, and human sweat. The preparation dictates patience. It is an anticlimax of intense labor, built around controlled anticipation. The fire itself is not yet lit, it only waits. You observe the small kindling pile, the gathered tinder that will be coaxed into life. Each piece of wood has its purpose. Some are for immediate combustion, others are structural. There is a silent understanding among those working here. Mastery resides not in a single powerful act, but in the careful sequencing of seemingly mundane preparations. The next phase involves building the initial, gentle bed of heat. You begin by arranging smaller bundles of dry kindling and starting to lay down small amounts of sawdust or dried brush, a slow burn designed only to raise the initial temperature gently. This initial lift must be gradual. It is crucial that the change in temperature happens over hours, not minutes. A sudden shock would shatter the porcelain shells of your wares. You watch as a few tentative sparks dance and then settle, catching enough breath to deepen into a steady orange glow. As the heat slowly begins to climb, it alters the atmosphere immediately around you. The air becomes thicker, carrying an increasingly mineral scent, a strange mix of burnt wood and heated earth that is uniquely powerful. You move systematically among the racks, making sure no piece has cooled excessively or been placed in a potential danger zone. Your movements are economical, practiced over years of repetition. With the base temperature established, the work shifts to managing the fuel. The burning is slow and steady. It cannot be allowed to become manic. You notice the quality of the flames licking up from the lower chambers. They should be hot enough to carry tremendous energy upward, but controlled enough not to scorch the exposed surfaces. This requires constant monitoring, a continuous adjustment between adding small amounts of kindling and simply managing the airflow with long, sturdy poles through vents near the base. This management is an art form in itself, reading the heat like one reads the weather. You must anticipate when the fire will peak its intensity and, crucially, predict how it will cool. The firing process requires understanding expansion and contraction, the physics of thermal stress on baked earth. Every layer of brick, every piece of pottery must bear the cycle of extreme heat and subsequent slow decay of temperature without giving way. The philosophical weight of this moment settles upon you. These pots, which started as nothing but damp, shapeless mud pulled from a ditch outside the city walls, are now transforming into durable objects capable of holding liquid for months, perhaps even years. They will carry the oil that feeds the lamp, or the wine drunk at the evening meal. Your labor has extended far beyond merely shaping. It has given these vessels utility and longevity. You lean against the side wall of the kiln, allowing the rising warmth to soak into your bones. You notice how the light changes, the deepening flush of orange and red reflecting off the interior bricks creates a rich, almost otherworldly glow that contrasts sharply with the dusty, late afternoon sunlight filtering in from the yard entrance. This controlled luminosity is your element for the next many hours. The day's labor was one of physical creation. This phase is one of disciplined containment and patience. You understand that true skill here is not muscular strength, but the ability to wait, to hold steady amidst colossal energy change. The process becomes a rhythmic form of meditation, stacking wood, adjusting airflow, watching the color gradient shift from dull red to incandescent orange. As evening approaches, painting the sky in deep hues of purple and bruised violet over the terracotta roofs, the heat inside the kiln reaches its maximum. You make one last circuit, inspecting the arrangement with the meticulous care of a guardian. The smell is overwhelming now, a potent, dry perfume of fully combusted carbon, silica vaporizing, and intensely heated minerals. It is the scent of transformation itself. This slow escalation of temperature ensures that every single particle within every piece achieves its intended state of permanence, completing the circle from soft earth to enduring form. The steady, powerful warmth envelops you, a palpable force demanding respect and continual attention, until finally it begins the long, inevitable work of cooling down. The air that greets you after the fire has banked is profoundly different from the searing heat of the kiln itself. It is a cool, damp evening draft, smelling of spent wood smoke and cooled minerals. You walk away from the massive structure of the firing shed, leaving the glowing remnants of the day's effort behind you. The cooling process is not merely an absence of heat, it is a palpable, evolving environment that changes the air pressure and slightly cools your palms as you brush past the thick stone wall. You pause just outside the working area to allow your breathing to settle into a slower, more even rhythm. The yard, which hours ago had been dominated by smoke and intense light, now settles into a quiet twilight hush. The day's labor seems to have compressed itself into the shadows, and the settling dust motes caught in the faint breeze filtering between the stacked forms. You survey the workshop space, recognizing the familiar pattern of organized mess. Scattered tools resting near designated places, wheel spoked patiently waiting for its next use, piles of damp scraps neatly contained by straw barriers. It is a tableau of industry at rest. You begin the quiet ritual of clearing away the day's physical remnants. You fetch your small, stiff-bristled broom, designed for sweeping fine dust and ash rather than coarse earth. The bristles sing against the hard-packed stone floor with a soft, repetitive whisper, a rhythmic counterpoint to the fading buzz of Roman life beyond the yard gates. Each gentle sweep gathers up little fragments, shards of pottery too chipped for repair, specks of gray kiln debris, tiny grains of white glaze residue. These pieces are not trash, they are the detritus of utility, evidence that something has been used and successfully completed. The methodical action of sweeping becomes a meditation on order. You watch how the dust collects in soft drifts where the corners meet the stone, a light layer of ochre-stained earth mixed with fine charcoal powder. It is not clean perfection you seek, but structural peace. By restoring the geometric order to your immediate workspace, you restore a quiet measure of internal calm. The air here now carries three distinct smells: the deep, sweet tang of cool, damp earth from the stored clay in the pit nearby, the faint, metallic, almost sweet scent of unburnt glaze powders, and most prominently, the mellow ghost of wood smoke. This composite aroma is the signature scent of your existence, the smell of transformation and daily sustainment. You breathe it deeply, a sensory anchor tethering you to this moment in time. You walk towards the section where the finished amphorae wait until their owners retrieve them. They are stacked high, these vessels, cooled now to a stable temperature. Their surfaces absorb the twilight gloom, holding the deep reddish tones of the fired clay mixed with the subtle sheen of minerals. You run your fingers along the curved shoulder of one large jug. The surface is cool, weighty, and smooth under your touch. There is a faint roughness still visible, the memory of the wheel's damp friction, now hardened into permanence. This simple physical connection reminds you of the immense amount of focused effort that went into its being. Later, when you are done sweeping, you gather the broom and your tools, placing them back where they belong. The movement is careful, deliberate. You do not want to disturb anything unnecessarily. You look at the row of drying greenware racks near the periphery. They seem almost ethereal now that the sun has departed. These pots are poised between worlds, solid, yet still vulnerable. They await the heat, the furnace breath, that will transform them from soft earth back into hardened utility. As twilight deepens further, the light shifts from the fading orange glow of the city to a deeper, more bruised blue. You realize your shoulders bear a gentle ache now, a dull throb in the muscles accustomed to repetitive motions, and carrying heavy baskets of damp materials. This physical discomfort is simply another tally mark on the ledger of a well-spent day. It is the quiet cost of creation. You sit down briefly near a low stone ledge just outside the main working area. You rest your forearms upon the cool, rough surface, letting them absorb the temperature gradient from the hot stones inside the kiln to the cooler air surrounding you. Your eyes drift over the accumulated detritus, not of waste, but of history. Each tiny shard tells a story. The slip that peeled away, the pot that cracked in transit, the glaze that held perfectly after multiple firings. These moments are when reflection arrives quietly, without dramatic fanfare. You think about the immense cycle of life contained within this yard. The earth gives its raw potential. Your hands apply skill and disciplined effort. The kiln provides controlled, violent energy. And finally, time sets the utility in place. It is a chain of dependency so absolute that it requires unwavering focus and quiet patience. There was no grand philosophy taught in Rome's great academies about this cycle. There were only practical needs: the water to store, the oil for the lamp, the wine for the table. Your craft met those fundamental needs directly. This grounding function was your value, a silent yet essential pillar supporting the bustling commerce of the city. You consider the men who pass through this yard's orbit, the merchants checking stock, the slaves carrying baskets weighed down by necessity, the barkers calling out prices for fine wares. You are integral to their success. Your skill doesn't buy status in a forum, but it secures daily sustenance across the busy waterways and into distant villas. It is a quiet pride rooted deep within your bones, unlike the boastful arrogance you might hear from the wealthy. The smell of ash and cool dampness becomes synonymous with this particular kind of quiet strength. It is the scent of materials at their end, settled into a temporary dormancy, waiting for the dawn's cycle to begin again. You take one last look over the organized chaos of your workshop, breathing in the mingled perfumes of mineral, wood smoke, and wet clay. The night descends fully, cloaking the yard in deep indigo shadows, leaving only the quiet certainty of work done well. Slowly, gently, you rise from the stone ledge. Your joints creak faintly with the effort, a soft sound that is barely audible above the distant murmur of Roman nighttime life filtering through the surrounding streets. You leave the workshop yard to the coolness and the emerging night, carrying with you not just your tools, but the quiet weight of another day's accomplished utility. The sounds of the city have softened now. The grate contained energy that had pulsed through the yard hours ago seems to settle into the cooling air, leaving only a hush punctuated by the distant clatter of an ox cart or the muffled call of a late merchant. You walk away from the kiln and the drying racks, turning your back on the geometry of functional art. The heavy rhythm of the working day, of hauling materials and shaping vessels, fades with every step. Your sandals crunch softly on the uneven paving stones that line this side street, a path less traveled than the busy arteries leading to the forum. You breathe deeply, taking in a breath that is fundamentally different from the thick air of the pottery yard. It is cooler, mixed now with the faint, sweet smell of spilled wine and damp Mediterranean night. You pass rows of multi-story dwellings. The terracotta tiles overhead absorb the last vestiges of daylight, cooling them into palpable shadow. You feel the slight drag of fatigue in your shoulders, a deep ache that speaks not of sudden labor, but of repetitive motion over countless years. It is an ache that belongs to hands and arms used consistently, gracefully, for craft. The memory of turning the heavy wheel centers itself gently, the coolness of the damp earth against your palms, the precise drag of wet fingers defining a neck or a belly. That physical remembrance anchors you to this quiet walk. The air carries the distinct ghost scent of spent wood smoke mixed with something mineral, the dry, earthy smell of clay that has seen its transformation and survived the heat. It is not the sharp smoke of the fire itself, but the gentle perfume of burnt matter meeting damp evening ground. You notice how the smooth coolness of the discarded pots, cooled by the night breeze, reflects a faint, dull gleam in your peripheral vision, little testament to the day's passage and transformation. You continue walking slowly, allowing your gaze to wander over the edges of the life you just left behind. The structures here are built for purpose. Sturdy walls, low gates, simple tiled roofs designed to shed sudden rains. Every element speaks of enduring utility, a quiet respect for function that underpins Roman life far more strongly than any painted fresco or lofty statue ever could. Nothing here is extraneous. Everything serves a necessity, a place for food, a basin for water, a chest for trade goods. Your mind shifts subtly to the texture of the finished work. You remember the way the glaze had settled over the amphora's lip, catching the light only when viewed at a certain angle. It was not a luxurious shine. It was a deeply satisfying sheen that spoke of durability and preparation. That deep satisfaction, the knowledge that your hands had taken raw, inert earth and imbued it with structure, purpose, and endurance, is what weights your steps gently forward. The street begins to feel quieter still. The sounds are localized now. The rhythmic drip of water from an overhead cistern, the soft murmur of voices drifting from a nearby insula window, perhaps neighbors settling in for the evening meal. These natural ambient noises provide a gentle rhythm that steadies your breathing and slows your pace further. You recall the physical acts of the day with startling clarity. The initial grit on your knees at the clay pits, the cool slickness of the wet slip coating your forearm as you mixed it into a slurry. You remember the focused pressure required when pushing against the damp mass of clay while centering the large lump, a physical argument with gravity and material resistance that demanded absolute stillness from your mind. These memories are not dramatic recitations. They are tactile echoes. It is the cool, slightly gritty feeling of the raw pigment powder under a careful thumbnail. It is the faint pull in your wrists from guiding the curvature of an outer wall on the spinning wheel. It is the steady, rhythmic scrape of the scraping tool against the soft curve of a semi-formed pot. You reach the mouth of a narrow alleyway. The shift in light and scent immediately becomes noticeable. This passage is sheltered, cool, and smells deeply of damp stone and accumulated years. Here, the noises of the main street are entirely muffled, absorbed by the close walls. You slow your stride, tilting your head slightly to listen to the sounds that seem to originate from within the stone itself. It brings you back to the concept of memory itself, not as a recollection of events, but as a physical sensation. The clay pressed between your fingers, the smooth coolness remaining under the night air. This residue of the day's labor is more substantial than mere thought. It is embedded in the muscles, in the skin, in the slow ache that serves as a quiet tally of accomplishment. You think about what sustains this life here, not grand imperial schemes or fleeting military victories, but the ceaseless cycle of making and necessity. The sheer volume of perfectly functional bowls, wine jugs, storage amphorae, all bearing your signature skill. Each one is designed to hold something vital for the community: bread, oil, water, trade goods. They do not speak of luxury, but they affirm life itself. As you navigate through this confined passage, you observe small details: a discarded terracotta shard embedded in the dirt track near your feet, bearing an faded, simple geometric pattern. A window lattice painted with vibrant, peeling hues that were once bright declarations of color. The heavy shadow cast by a column, suggesting centuries of similar nightly routines unfolding within its embrace. This walk is not about arriving anywhere specific, but about completing a circuit. It is a slow, deliberate letting go of the physical demands of the craft into the quiet solitude of the returning night. The labor today was productive, sustaining. You are physically tired, yes, but there is also a profound lightness, the lightness that comes from knowing you have been useful, knowing your skilled hands contributed to the silent, vital pulse of Roman commerce. The cool evening air seems to settle over you like a comforting weight. It washes away the grit and dust of the day's industry, leaving behind only the fundamental feeling, the enduring connection between human skill and the raw potential contained within the earth. You continue walking until the scent of damp stone finally gives way to the fainter, more pleasant aroma of domestic cooking smoke, a signal that the rhythm of the community is settling into its predictable comfort, and your day's